So it's a pleasure to be here and present the project I'm working on. I will just test if the slides are working, yes. So, as a matter of fact, it's probably not appearing from the title, but the Financial Data Standardization project is an interoperability project. So in that sense, we are very well aligned with the thinking and the presentations in the ISA² program, SEMIC as well, but I will make the link later. But we see that we are both in the interoperability domain, and in that sense, there is a natural synergy between what we are doing. Maybe one thing that is that I understood I have just 15 minutes. Is that correct? Or
let's say 12.
Yeah. So I will. So I will speak faster then. I hope that's okay. Or no, I will just try to summarize it as clear as possible. But it should also be clear. I can highlight a couple of important points, but certainly not provide all the details. For that, we would need more than 15 minutes. The background of the program, and I noted that other programs or projects are also in the same environment of what we call better regulation. So for us, the policy agenda that makes a project like ours possible is what we call better regulation. That means the regulation, the legislation we made on the European level, is it fit for purpose? How does industry perceive it? Can we do things better? Is it coherent? There are a lot of questions, and that is actually the policy link that we make, which I think is a part that is also sometimes not well stressed enough, but without support from the policy level, the highest level, it's very hard to do a project like this. And that is one of the parts we achieved. That is by getting support from the Vice President Dombrovskis, who is responsible. On the other hand, the REFIT, or the Better Regulation Program, is a program from the other Vice President Timmermans. So actually there is a support on a high level. So one of the first steps we did in our Directorate General, which is on financial services, financial stability and the Capital Markets Union, is to start in 2016 a call for evidence. So that was actually asking in a public consultation, what do you think about it, and tell us what we can do better. Unfortunately, we got a lot of replies, but we didn't get evidence. So that means, in other words, that all the replies we got were subjective. Every time we digged into the details, it appeared that there was no foundation. And it meant more or less that everyone was feeling like there is a problem, there is too much regulation, too much burden, too much cost, but nobody could put really the finger on it. So in any case, the project went on. In the meantime, I think that's important. We have an official report. You will find the reference there that was published the 1st of December last year, where we were able already to use terms like we need a holistic approach, a comprehensive approach. We need standardization, we need a common financial language, we need common reference data, common identifiers, and indeed standardization will also allow automation, which would indeed make it much easier to process the large amount of information. And then this year we did a public consultation on supervisory reporting, which is more specific than the call for evidence. And based on that, we actually had the 4th of June a big conference in Brussels with Vice President Dombrovskis himself, providing the results of the supervisory reporting public consultation. And together with what actually I will present later and the conference itself, I think we see that a lot of the findings are getting very well aligned. So I will enter into those details. So maybe first of all, the objectives of the project when it started, that is to see how can you make financial data more interoperable by the use of standards. How can you reduce the costs of financial reporting by indeed referring to the once for all principle. Also explore solutions, ways to do things better. And from the supervisory side, the Commission side, also how can we improve the monitoring of risk? Because one of the big problems in the market is that it's very hard to do risk aggregation. And for that reason, sometimes a big investment company or bank goes out of business from one moment to another, because there are so many linkages and interdependencies that even the company itself has problems to know how the risk is exposed or not. The environment we work in, to put it high level, you will see that we are the regulators. We are on the left side, so we create legislation. We have the supervisors who very often are involved on level 2 legislation, which are more the implementation details and even further. And then you have the industry who have to report. So if you look on the slide, currently what you have is an arrow and the information flow between the industry and the supervisory authorities, but you will see the link between the legislation and the other part is at the moment missing. So that is exactly the starting point, our scope. If you then look on a high level, what do we actually do to make it very simple? So just to look at this curve, you might recognize it, but I recognize it from my economy course of the potato field with farmers, that if you add more farmers on the potato field, you get more potatoes. But if you then continue adding farmers, at a certain moment you get less potatoes again, and you become less productive. And you see this curve follows exactly the same curve. And if you then look at the call for evidence we got, that was very subjective. What they actually claim is that we are in this cloud on the right side with the red cross. That means the level of efficiency is actually the same level you could achieve with less cost, but at the moment it costs us a lot more than actually is necessary. And that is exactly what we have investigated and are still doing at the moment. That is, we look at all the inconsistencies, duplications, overlaps, redundancies. And then the second step is, once we are there, but this is a step we still have to do, we have to look, can we actually, with the same cost, can we get the curve higher? Can we actually report more? So we started analyzing. So unfortunately, all the pages of legislation DG FISMA has created didn't fit on the picture, but this is a snapshot. So altogether, to give an idea, since the financial crisis and the 10 following years, about 300 legal acts have been produced on level 1, level 2, thousands of pages. And if you then look at, it doesn't work, okay, yeah. If you then look at it, for us when we started, it was just a huge amount of information without any organization. So the first thing we did is to organize them in a logical combinations, which we call reporting frameworks. And then you will see that level 1 and level 2 documents logically fit together. And I don't go into the details, but in the financial sector, this is, let's say, very relevant. Maybe here it's too detailed to go into it. But what we did is we looked at all those reporting frameworks. We tried to find all kinds of facts like which legislation is involved, are they structured, non-structured, are they active, non-active. We also went to the scope, who are the stakeholders, the market size, numbers of facts you have to report, and the frequency. Possible discrepancies with national legislation, and altogether we used that to rank everything. We also then said we have to focus on the structured reporting frameworks where it is easy to analyze the data and whether there are inconsistent data between the different reporting frameworks. And then what we did is we came up with an overview where you also can see who are exactly the stakeholders, who is involved. And that's the first time ever, I think, somebody did that. So based on that, we know exactly with whom we have to talk and which agencies. So, and what we also saw, that is in many of those reporting frameworks, there are a lot of overlaps between the different actors. So you cannot really conclude from that which the overlaps are, but at least you see that this is not just a problem for the European Commission, we need to work together with what we call the supervisory agencies and the European Central Bank and some others. And actually, that is what we started up now, the first discussions on the findings of the project. This is, I think, more interesting here. That is what I did as well. I made overviews of, if you look at our current legislation, what does it mean in terms of standards? I'm not sure if you can read it, but I can't. But what you see is that if you look at the structured reporting framework that we analyze, every dark blue dot or rectangle is actually something that is mandatory. So if you count the numbers of fields, there is not a lot mandatory. The same applies for exchange formats. If you look into the details, there are formats like PDF format, like electronic format, like email. So all that is of course not very helpful to impose standards. And I think it's one of the reasons that, let's say, industry is complaining, because there are no common visions on which let's say, modeling tools to use or which reporting formats to use. And as you can see that in many cases there are boxes that are, let's say, light blue, but that means that industry decided to do it a certain way, but it's not even mandatory, so you can easily deviate it from it. The other interesting part was which identifiers do we use. Well, 35 in total, without any problem. I'm not counting the member states where there are other identifiers. But this all proves that there is a need to come to, let's say, a strategy or an overview how to address all that. But for me, this explains a part of what needs to be done on the interoperability level. That is come to common identifiers, common standards, and to deploy a strategy on that. So the challenge, I think, and that's important, that is in order to address a problem like that, we see that the burden is ever increasing. There are always more legislations added. We see that there are multiple entities that are deciding. We have at the moment more than 80,000 what we call data points of information. And this number is increasing at the moment. But I think the most important part is the change. So all those legislations, on top of that, they change continuously. So I think it is no wonder that it is perceived like this is a burden. And that is exactly what we currently are looking into. That is, what can we do about it, where Europe can really support industry to do it better and deploy some initiatives that only Europe can deploy, because at the moment everything is addressed in silos. And within the silo, you cannot efficiently address the burden. So we did a cross-framework analysis for all the reporting frameworks. That is because industry claims we always report the same. Interestingly enough, we found that about 3,000 cases, things look the same. But after analysis in detail with first subject matter experts, we could reduce it to, let's say, 600. Then we had an expert group with the supervisory agencies. We could reduce it to about 100. And then after in-depth investigation, which means with top-level experts, you will find one or two in Europe of that, we could actually conclude that there were only about 27 overlaps. But I think the lesson from that is that a lot of information looks like it is a duplication, it's an overlap. But if you then really look at what is meant, what legislation actually tried to ask, but it wasn't really clear what they meant, and you then get the experts to do that, you can conclude that there are not so many overlaps at all. But I think the real conclusion is that it is really difficult to understand legislation, to understand what needs to be reported exactly, and that all points to, well, I want to vary, but that all points to the fact that, that we need a common language, common ontologies, common identifiers, and that fits very well, I think, with the ISA² interoperability model. So all those layers, I think, we need, and that is actually what we will try to address. So just to give you an idea what we mean by inconsistencies. So in all our reporting frameworks, this is just an example, an easy one. That is what is meant by annually. And then you will see that one or a few frameworks, they say it is annually, but some others say at least annual, others say at least on an annual basis, others say at least once a year. And then you start to see that indeed with every new legislation it is clear that everyone independently needs to analyze, is it now actually the same or not the same? But this is actually the evidence we are collecting now. Another one is this, that is that there are two different legislations, and what you see is in one case they say it's a non-financial counterparty, and in another case a non-financial entity, but they mean twice the same. But how can you know? And I think that at the bottom is a bit the conclusion. That is, if something appears to be the same, how to know it is the same? And that is, I think, new, because nobody really could tell that before, because there was no evidence and no facts. But for us, this seems to be the problem to address. So that all leads to our conclusion. If you like the once for all principle, we believe in the defined ones. That is actually what I'm trying to take forward, and so after all this we will try to investigate how exactly you can achieve that. It's too long now to explain the details, but of course we know a lot more already. So I think the Danish Business Authority, they had the slide looking like that, but I'm sure my slides are nicer in color. But I think they mean the same. That is what they also see is you need something in the middle. And if you look in the ISA² context, you could say we need a core vocabulary. I've seen very similar slides, by the way, as that, with even 3 layers around it. And we would say, because we are in the regulatory reporting environment of RegTech, why will we not try to make a core RegTech vocabulary? And if you then think back of the first slide I was presenting, you will see that what we actually need is something in the middle that links the legislation with this common basis. So the definitions are always the same, the context is always the same. In that case, the supervisors also use the same, and the reporting entities also the same. So this is a bit our vision that we are working on. And in order to do that, the core in the middle, that is what should then be a common language, common ontology, common identifiers, and then indeed the link with the legislation. And those are all the projects we are working on. So this I won't explain for time limitations, but of course if you can get it all in with ontologies in triples, you can deduct all kinds of information. This is all a vision. I mean, this is not approved yet, but that also means that you can link it to the way industry reports, but you can also link it to the legislation. And I think this is my last slide. That is the roadmap. So you see that we take all kinds of actions at the moment. One is Eurolex. So actually we started up discussions with the official publication office. So to see how far they are and how far we can make legislation machine readable. I also think we should continue the discussion with the Danish Business Authority, who actually said the same in other words. That is, how do we make legislation, ICT, readable or understandable? For us it's the same, with the difference that we have to start on that level. And indeed, what we will try to understand is how can we work in a way that they use the same common basis, if we can develop it, but also how can we make legal text machine readable. Then all the initiatives, I think I will not mention now, but it's clear we start communication with stakeholders. At the moment we talk with agencies, with the central bank, but we will extend to industry and to national competent authorities. You will see that there is a lot ongoing on modeling. It's also too detailed now, but I will not enter into it. Ontology, yeah, we are looking into that as well, but I'm afraid that the problem is not the ontology, the problem is machine learning. So I think we have about 20,000 pages of legislation. We did some tests to build ontologies, and it is very time consuming, and that is confirmed by a lot of others in the market who tried. The only difference is that because of the analysis I did in details, we actually have an enormous body of knowledge with facts and details. We also have what we call data point models, and what we want to test is if we feed that into machine learning, whether we cannot make this machine really intelligent so that together with subject matter experts, we can come to some faster approach. But I think this is, from my perspective, one of the bottlenecks. That is, if the machine learning cannot become more intelligent than we see today, I don't think we will have the time to do it ourselves. But that would then lead to crowdsourcing or something like that. Standardization, yes, we look in standardization. So with the ISO committee, with SEN, I'm also involved with a legal entity identifier. Actually, I'm the representative of the Commission in the Regulatory Oversight Committee. We also were able to group the UPI, UTI discussions, which are on products, on transactions, which is by the G20 initiatives of the Financial Stability Board. Then technology, well, normally that comes at the end, but some years ago we started already with a prototype on distributed ledger blockchain. So we know very well what it can do on the regulatory reporting. I think basic conclusion is that all those technologies miss functionality on reporting, so we have to develop it all ourselves. So at the end you can really question if you use those technologies, is there now still blockchain or DLT? I think it's a huge architecture in which a small part, in the best case, is DLT. But there are some advantages. And then the governance model. What I see, and I think with some of you, you all are aware of that, I think there is a lack of governance. I think if you just look on a day like today, we hear a lot about identifiers. But I think there is a real need to put all that information together and see how we can come to one identifier. At the moment, I'm aware of 7 initiatives that all try to do the same on different levels. Well, we have already, for example, the LEI, but that I think is a discussion that would be worth to explore and see how it can all fit together. They all have their purpose, but we have already global identifiers, so why try to, well, invent new ones? The last part is possible cooperation with SEN and alignment with ISO, and that would then all lead, if we can move it forward, to what we call a core RegTech vocabulary. So here I would like to conclude. So I think for questions it's at the end, maybe after. Yeah.